that layer, that layer, that layer, exactly where this happens at, and it has those sedimentary profiles, and I don't want to get into that type of thing, but you can in the article itself, for it goes on for a couple of pages here talking about all what's been found in those. I thought one thing that was interesting here is they try to show you an idea conceptive of the way that this thing looked as it went through it and then dating after it. And so you can see the actual tell and the way the rock structure was in sand, and then how it overtook its part and coming through, how it took a lot of this sand that's out in this area here and it's kind of disappeared and it all ended up over here, but then it swaths over the area, leaving the sedimentary layers that they went through. And this is a weird different graphic representation that you see sometimes, and this is the basic way it duned and went out. And if you go through this, or you were able to take it in a video form back to back, you would see that on this side there was sand, and then there's the tell area and the heart of it in the middle and the darker part. But then all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but then over a period of time, it swaths over it, it's encased, and then now the sand has been eroded away from those points to the point that they found it at and past it, but before it was the other way around. So it also makes you wonder what's up under all that sand right there that might show you other places that were trapped in time exactly at this point. Also, I want to find what archaeological remnants that they find in this area that correlate to it, some of the trinkets, anything really. Let's see what it connects to. So, implications of high salinity for agriculture and coeval destruction and burning of Jericho happened at the time, or it looks like simultaneously. Potential causes of the city of destruction was anthropogenic activities, pottery making, normal city fires, wildfires, midden fires, warfare, like in the Bible talks about, earthquakes and volcanism, lightning perhaps, crater forming, cosmic impact, cosmic airburst, analogous destruction events, comparison to Trinity atomic detonation, comparison to Tunguska cosmic airburst, hypothetical Tunguska class airburst near Tel El-Hammam conclusions. So, hand of God. Here's another representation of it, and we've gone on to part 2 now. And each successive part is going to be up in your top left-hand corner. Usually that cuts out about 10 to 15 seconds of what I was saying, and it'll probably cut off the ending again. Okay, so here we can see this line that's in here. So the occupation level is all the way to there, and it got all blown apart and all that stuff settled into it, and then all the sediment and destruction rested on top of it, filling it up half, 2/3 of the way, and then no one lived here for 300 to 600 years at least, and then it started being slowly occupied again. But whenever it did, they were all building on the top layer, where you see those 2 people up there in the top of the picture. And so, and they had polished floors and things going on, but this is 1600, so there's nothing really that fancy about that. What ends up being fancy about this site is that now we can show the finger of God was something like this event, and that it could happen again, and people are sitting around with a thumb up their ass. But here we see the palace and its layer, and it's right in front of him, the clay floor. But look at this pottery. Just looks strange and warped, and the reason it does is it heated up enough to where it became a little flobbity as it got blown over and then cracked and stuff too. It's amazing. They show some close-up pictures of this, and it's like you can tell which the layer was the outside and which was the inside, because the outside would have had that direct singe, And though the inside is bisque to 2,000 degrees, that outside, wow. Some of those are impregnated with all these ion spherules and stuff that were just blown right into them at one single point. Here we can see the idea of where they keep talking about of diamonds, and this is something that I don't know if it's picking up here, but inside especially is this. It almost looks like a Waverly thing, like what's sometimes shown in arrowheads and so on, but this is a fractionating, and so much pressure has to be involved along with this idea. This is almost the idea of Superman, where this carbon is taken and just fractionated and then impinged upon with heat and pressure so quickly, not over millions of years, that you can actually form diamonds. Here's a close-up of an electron microscope, and you can actually see in that picture the granules and kind of the way it runs, and almost a magnetism, kind of weird lines. This weird pyramid depiction is supposed to be, I'll read it to you down below. It's a reflective type quality thing onto it. In fact, these other ideas where they show diamonds and then some real good ones in it. Also, this picture here that's all blue and blacklight looking, which I've talked about in a lot of my videos, from saltwater corals to all kinds of things. These type of diamonds show up and fluoresce under this type of 420 to 440 nanometer lighting that you get LEDs to pitch to that point, or they had bulbs that had high pitch points to that before that were fluorescent and would do this stuff saying. So that C that's over there with the pyramid is a selected area carbon diffraction called SAD of residue in grid film, confirming that the residue is amorphous carbon. Yeah. So again, here we see diamond-like carbon embedded in pottery. This, if you can see it, is actually just embedded in, like, pow! And what is that? Well, it's diamond-like carbon, little diamonds impregnated into it. It's from the palace area, too. So the pottery palace got blown with these little micro fragments of diamonds, basically. Shotgun shot with diamonds at the speed of sound or more come ripping through there. Things that are just not far away from them, made of things that have high carbon in them, became vaporized in one moment. And then, you know, you've seen those videos on nuclear blasts, and they show you a house, and if it's at the right distance, just about, whenever it explodes, you'll actually first see it kind of suck in and get pulled to the left, and then all of a sudden, wow, and it just gets blown off its foundations to the right, and a blistering couple of frames, it's gone. Well, during that interim point right there, if you watch closely, everything starts to ignite just spontaneously, and so it ignites everything around you, and then all of a sudden, wow, it just blows it into you. And it's amazing. It has so much power. Something 20, 30 feet away from you, perhaps, that's made of wood, could be turned into a carbon type thing that all of a sudden, when it gets impinged upon, gets so much pressure, it almost turns it into a diamond, and it blows it into pottery and stuff that is so hot at that point, it embeds off into it, leaving a glazed surface on the pottery that's pitted all over it too, places where it's just gassing off and going crazy. A little bit of power going on with that concept. In fact, here's that pottery in and out that we're talking about, where the inside, here's a piece from the palace on the left, and the inside of that pottery is real smooth, but you look at the outside of that pottery, and this piece has been basically glazed and impinged upon by all this stuff. And it might have had a glazing ombre to it originally in the first place, but they've taken a look at it under a microscope, and that shows you those things they're talking about. Another example here from the lower Tel area, as it blew through there and cooked these people, is a red ochre pottery here, which on the left looks fairly normal, but on the right you can tell it looks like old coral reef rock that's been eroded over thousands of years, but that's where it popped and gassed off, for it literally became liquid. Here's close-up pictures of some of the impinging onto it and things like that, and some of it's gassing off and some of its little particles getting blown into it extremely at high speed while it's being spontaneously heated up to 2,000 degrees in the process of a second or two. So here's another depiction here, melted mud brick from the palace, and I know it doesn't look like bricks, but they can tell this actually were bricks. And the part that was facing right where it came and got ignited from and then blown into the stuff that's there, not the ones that got scattered off the top or reaches, but it's the same similar type material, and some of them show you that, oh, they get corner edges to them and stuff, and you can tell kind of on the left one here, it looks to me like there's a square brick all melted into all this other crap that's just, what is that? And perhaps a little piece of that iron hit it right in the middle and pop, left a crater that's there. Melt glass, it basically turning it into glass. Here's another picture set. Wow, that was a quick zoom in. Showing you the way their floors were built, which is pretty neat. It's our artist representation, what you would be looking at. But you can see that there are these giant cedar timbers that are here, and then they're cross-hatched with another one, making something like a raft that we would think of. And then on top of it, straw is all put in between it, but then it's swathed over with dripping clay, basically, and then smoothed out, and then there's been layers and layers of clay that have been put upon it. And what they want to show you here is that the top layer of clay is not normal. It has actually been immolated and melted to the point that it has little pockets of air and everything into it that really wouldn't be evident anywhere below that, and how it's been bisqued. This also makes me think of the ancient cedar forests that are so sacred that there probably was clusters of around this place, which whenever this went on would have spontaneously ignited. Again, this may be some of the sources of the diamonds that they're talking about. Literally, it can take a forest a couple of hundred yards before this place, as it's blowing it into it through a nuclear reaction type thing, and turn a lot of that carbon and then the pressure that's impinged upon it whenever that concussive wave happens, diamonds, and then it's being slung at you at such a speed, or at everything, in a dust storm that's going on at the speed of that concussive wave. It's amazing. Basically sandblasts everything, but then the sand that it's blasting it with is on fire, turning into glass and all of this metal and things that we're talking about. Quite hellish, quite biblical. So over here on your right, you can see these two little green tubes that are put through there, and that's an artist's representation of these tubes that were found right above it there in that other rock that you see, and what would have been like, because that is the straw that's mixed into mud bricks, zoomed in close, and then there are tubes there, and then that would have been straw that run through there, and it would have looked like this. But then whenever it bisqued everything off of it, it's left with just a little bit of ash. Here again are some of these melting things, roofing clay they were talking about before, and that's the other thing too. All the roofs here were all decimated and put down inside of it. Basically, they talk about incineration of straw, diameter holes that I showed you before in other places that have been bisqued, and they can tell, where it was affected so much more versus other places onto it, showing you, there was no safe place, really. And again, this straw effect through these mud bricks, that doesn't look like a mud brick anymore. It's now an igneous type of rock. Well, yeah, it was all turned to pretty much that. It's amazing the power that went on here. Where are we at in time? 15? Okay. Directional debris Pot shards, charred grains, and melt glass are all found on this layer that's right here, being the layer during the time of occupation that was here. And it looks like the northeast, which is that arrow that's pointing there, would effectively be like my finger here coming across. So the direction it came was from way over there across over this area. And even though this is in the shadow of the heat, a protected situation, everything there was fractionated, turned into that melted glass. Directional part shards, grains shown here. So it's an amazing sight. And I thought at first, if I went through these pictures and didn't just talk too much, I could have got it in one. But no, not me. We're only at page 20 here on this, so we're going to start going through some of these. And it'll leave some of it for you to be read if you're really into such things to show it. But showing you here in this picture, this original wall, down the bottom pictures, it'll show you the depiction where the original wall and this huge area and the debris originally hit this wall, sheared off that wall, and then in that wall and everything went to the right. And then the last picture is got laid over by all the crap that was coming at them that was going to settle there from thousands of yards back southwest. And then all of the dust plume. I'm certain that it probably looked a little bit like piece of the sun fell to these people. But also the after effect of it would have looked a lot like what you see in a volcano. Again, I guess here's a good close-up of this, and here it shows that direction I was talking about now. Basically came from the direction of this arrow that's up here, and then all of this debris that was laid over and exploded in directions, like a shotgun blast, is basically in that same direction, right? And again, melted glass, breccia. It's shown here under different spectrometry, so they can show you these shocked grain quartz and things and grains and the directions of what it runs. And a lot of people have seen these enough times to be able to tell. In fact, they know the exact amount of pressure that's kinetic that causes this to happen. And in a lot of cases, they were trying to fractionate quartz and smack it and get this thing to happen. So it's a little different than just the regular concussion that happens off of it whenever it does. In a more modern day, they've been able to correlate it a little bit more to the amount of concussion that goes on. But then again, we just start talking in thousands of times the Hiroshima bomb whenever we do. So more and more data here, and this is the angle of things got blown out from. And so while there was probably repeated bursts that were happening, here I can give you part of that picture. Not where I wanted to. That everything's not laid down in one direction, but that's because probably there were repeated bursts that happened in this area. They even show some pictures of images of crystals from nuclear sites versus it and so on, like they do a lot of times, and compare them, and melt glass in the same way that's happening. So it's really just over and over confirming it. But so you know the recent Russian one that happened, right? Where it was miles away from those people, and then whenever it went through and it busted, everybody was like, wow. And it took a minute or so, and then all of a sudden, finally, the shock wave from as far away as it was hit them there, and it caused a lot of building destruction and glass going everywhere, and a huge big problem there. Well, this thing would have been 1,000 times perhaps as strong, counting the fact that it stretched out over an area. But imagine if that wouldn't have been where it was. Here's perfect spherules showing you blown, and the way those happen is during this concussive explosion being blown out, and due to natural roundness they turn round, so you get this weird thing. And then when they find those, they're like, what the hell is that? Micro BBs. I think right coming up is a picture that I wanted to use, but then again, here's all of these melted glass, zircon, all types of things they're showing you. And then some of these start to be metals that they're showing you liquidated and melted into things, some of which apparently what they're talking down before are natural nuggets of ore that has started to be smelted because of this, such as this one that's right here in the bottom, which is silver and nickel. And these percentages that are here, and they plotted out on this idea here too. I don't want to have to go into every bit of it, and I don't think that you want me to, but it's amazing the amount of heat contact damage that's done to this surfaces, and it's really the whole area. So that's why they know that there was nothing localized about it, and it went on pretty much for there. But if you took the idea of that Russian meteor where it's really going in at a hard angle, here is showing people and bones with some damage, but this may not be the one that they talk about. But supposedly the other person, or part of the person that goes along with this, whose legs got sheared off here somehow, are way the hell over there, a couple of 100 feet away. That piece isn't in good shape either. There's something about his toes here and how they're all messed up, and then how the body had been cooked a little, pretty much. See, review the same. The orange tint of the skull suggests it was composed temperatures over 200 degrees. Second skull, purple, numerous disarticulated fragment human bones, orange arrows, charcoal fragments, yellow circles. Lower torso from the ring road of lower tall orange arrows and other disarticulated bones show evidence of being burned. Red arrows and the rest of the skeleton is dismembered and disarticulated. Hyperflexed toes, which is that purple arrow, are consistent with either post-mortem or pre-mortem exposure to high temperatures, where involuntarily your toes would actually curl under. And they've seen this with places like Pompeii and so on, and others. So here we can see a bone that's been charred to this point. It's actually been semi-crystallized, and so has the marrow inside. In fact, they refer to it as glass, that the center marrow here is glass. Bone, there's a mix, and it turns the center of it to glass. Here's a rib that's encrusted with salt-rich sediments that have been fused onto it. And you look at this rib and it almost looks like a red ochre burial type thing, but that red ochre effect is not from that. It's from this oxide in the sediments that are all around it. So there's a huge amount of iron that's associated with this. Bone associated with salt and melted tin oxide. So if you were to take that event and run it on the map here showing you this, this shows you in red dots where the salinity of the ground has been heightened to a large point. Orange a little bit less, blue a little less, turquoise a little bit less, but all affected from this running down. And that river running down from the top is a freshwater river running into the Dead Sea there, but it evaporates more than it puts out. Let's put it that way. all of those sites that you see that are circles, not just blobs, that are there, are also considered, let's see, they would have been lethal for domestic crops, they say. And so it really ruined all the crops in those areas, and they can tell from places that they've sampled in here what levels that it's at, and yeah, it all ruined the whole area in the Jordan Valley. And again, it came from south-southwest, ripping through here. These mountains over here to the right, whenever they get melted, the right side of them would melt off, and that goes into the Euphrates and runs down too. So it's another effect that could have been caused by this. And then all the people of this area might have decided to move to a different area that's a little more safe. I think that has to do with the Hyksos type invasions. And so here we're looking at whether or not this stuff was melted. And literally, this chart here, it's all melted pottery, melted iron, melted sediment, melted this, melted that. Plant matter fractionated and turned into carbon, diamond-like carbon, all this other stuff. It's and it goes on and on and on and on and on, and showing you, oh, that, I'm sorry, I went over it too much. There was comparing actually things there that are found at the Trinity site of the atomic blast test, and how it kind of like that, looks just like that. So here's a projected idea of what happened here, and so I can give you that concept here as we end this. This came in slightly from the south-southwest again, so if I'm to do it, it's supposed to be a little bit at that angle and come ripping through here. And it was exploding along this trail as it caught fire and broke into pieces as big as your house, going 70,000 miles an hour, fastly slowing down to 30,000 miles an hour, but in that friction was causing each one of those houses full of iron and all kinds of other things that are showing you here, fractionated and broke up again, and in that kinetic power that's there, that exploded. And this is comparing the Tunguska event to it. And so whenever Tunguska exploded, and it exploded and let it all loose, it was the yaw. But right here is the yeah, all the way up through the Jordan Valley and extents they've shown here. But if there was any ice on these ridges here, it runs down and so on. And is there any more effect? And this again was flying over at a hard angle, not coming in like this, or well, a hard angle, at a soft angle, if you will, and coming in. And so it was burning up, coming all the way through here, and due to that effect, it didn't hit someplace like the Dead Sea and cause a crater necessarily, but was over the ground, but not too far, and just singed and burned everything up. And the extent here of the red is probably the extent of the places that spontaneously ignited due to the amount of fire and then concussion that went on, just like a nuclear blast. And you can put in your mental picture of Terminator or World War II test and so on, and how it's blowing down that thing, or maybe the one that was in the recent Indiana Jones attempt on there. That was pretty cool, although he gets in a lead line. They just hook that all up, boom, it blows him away. Gophers, that was cute as hell. In this picture we can see where Tel El-Hammam is, and so it's an idea, I guess, that it didn't come directly over it, but a little off left. So that would have put it in between them and Jericho. And with the amount of explosive concussive power that's shown here, it probably did blow down the walls of Jericho. In this one event, we probably can connect 2 or 3 things. Maybe a biblical story, what was kept, of an idea of what had happened to these people. But then also, what led to a lot of people in this area going south. And you could see how people could pull this into a mythology, and back whenever the Bible was pulling things and trying to use things. And if certain things happened, they'd be, see, I told you. And use that for, well, an extent of helping, of power and so on. Make no mistake, if people lived through an event like this, people that knew about it that were around there could easily utilize this for a point of saying, see, Han wants your children. Yeah, things along that idea. So, again, we're showing you something here that's the Tunguska event, I believe, is the supercomputer, because a lot of people have done tests on that. And they're showing you here that at the very start of it, it has this superheated plume of gas fragments reaches the surface. And yet it doesn't do it just there. It does it all the way across. And if you lay that over on it again, it starts off in that Red Sea area, Dead Sea, area, and encompasses going in. But then instead of stopping where this one does, which is pretty much where my pointer here is, it goes off the end of the scale here. It's also about as wide as where I'm showing you here, and about as wide as it goes, almost off the end of the scale there. Hypervelocity of ionized gas happened and expanding at 1,225 kilometers per hour, 761 miles an hour. One could suggest that whenever this exploded and then rippled through and that one go boom, there was a lot of debris that hit the ground like a shotgun shell that's going on. Whenever this one did, by the data that looks like to me, this happened in a series of explosions as it ripped apart in pieces. And so there would have been explosions as big as that, there and there and there and there and there and there, and maybe one made it past, because this is all again going at this angle here. And if we were to say, well, one good chunk made it through, like we were to see in Iceland from the Younger Dryas event, or Abu Huraira, which we've talked about in this video, it made it farther and kept going, zoom, bam, and then it, did its event. We have something that correlates to a flood that perhaps happens in Samaria, and a huge event there that could have been easily triggered by just melting a large amount at one time of the ice that usually stays year-round on some of those hills in there, and was more evident at that time and has had to grow back from that time. Strange to think about, but that was 15 megatons, and they're giving it a much more broader breadth, if you will, than that. Here we get into all the research and each IBID and everything into there, and other accounts that they have of other people, and spherules that match spherules, and spherules that match spherules, and oh my God, and it goes on and on. So, again, something that's pretty large here, but not too far off the screen to the left of this is the Mediterranean, and about equal to the Dead Sea, or a little lower if you go to the left, ends up being the Delta, where they ended up, perhaps this event driving these people to end up going to. Wonder if we looked around in here if there's any more, because that little circle they show you at Tel El-Hammam is what is actually evident in this site, in the breadth of the study that they're doing here, but it also encompasses the idea that it happened over an idea as large as this. And wait, there's Jericho. Is there any more? Is there any more? If this appears to have gone southwest to northeast, is there anything northeast that would have shown this had happened simultaneously and its effects? A lot of things we're just learning about this, but what do you think about this as possibly being the ancient tale of the idea of Sodom or Gomorrah? For if I remember correctly, some people in esoteric knowledge and everything pulled it out, and they actually were trying to say that it was down over here in the Red Sea, that it wasn't here, it wasn't here. So it wouldn't have been there, it would have been there. Another one says that it's down off the bottom edge of it and over at that angle and so on, that it really wants to try to pull it down in that area of it happening because of the journey that he took during the story leading up to, through, and then after it. made a little more sense to some people. Let me know what you think down in the comments. But here we have another case where it looks like mythology and archaeological studies meet. Peace.